Hello, good morning and welcome to the second session of day 2 of the NHS Project Futures Festival 21. I'm Jo Stanford and I'm going to be introducing to you CAROLE Osterweiel, who is going to do today's morning session, and in a moment I will introduce her, but before that, just very quickly, for those of you that haven't joined the sessions before, you'll see on the right hand side of the screen a panel including the chat, Q&A and notes. So the chat is obvious. Make comments, say hello, introduce yourselves and talk to each other. And post any comments about the session and your thoughts about it. It's always really good to see. The Q&A is for you to put questions to CAROLE as you think of them. Once they've been published, you can like someone else's questions, and the questions with the most likes will rise to the top of the list. There will be time at the end of the session for CAROLE to answer your questions, and because it's quite a big session, it's quite a few people, we have to stick to time. So if we don't get to any of the questions before the end, we will share them with CAROLE and we will get the answers back to you at the end. As with the other sessions, there is a game code at the beginning of the session for those that arrive on time, and at the end of the session there will be one as well for those that stay right to the end. If you have any difficulties at any time, you can check the information tab at the quick guide on the left hand side menu bar, and at the bottom of the bar there is also a help desk, and we have a moderator there who can help to deal with any queries or questions you've got, so just post a message. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce you to CAROLE Osterville. CAROLE is a leading light in applied neuroscience, and particularly in the application of applied neuroscience to project delivery. She's the author of the book, Project Delivery, Uncertainty and Neuroscience, A Leader's Guide to Walking in Fog. And she's also a transformation troubleshooter and coach for Visible Dynamics. So welcome, CAROLE, to this morning, and thank you for being here.
Hello, everybody. It's delightful to be here. Jo and I have been speaking about this festival for a couple of months at least. So at last we're here. I want to say thanks, Jo. Yeah, it's my pleasure. So a little bit about a couple of my beliefs, really, I'll start with, and then you can see I've set out here what it is I want to be covering in this session. And perhaps I'm just going to touch for a moment on the title of my organization, Visible Dynamics. And that's because I'm on a mission. My mission in life, and it has been for the last 10 years, is about making all the invisible dynamics, the stuff that goes under the surface of your projects, more visible, so that we can get to better outcomes, higher productivity, and this one I'm sure will appeal to you, less stress. And what I'm planning on doing in this session today is to give you some thoughts on how the human brain works, and to give you insight really into why people behave as they do. And I'm pulling this all together into what I shall describe as one underpinning model, not because I'm on a campaign to take over the world, but I've sat back since actually publishing the book, and I've thought a lot about how come it is so really difficult for people to get their projects to land. And it seems to me there's lots of stuff around leadership change, management and people management, which sound like really good, kind of good practice stuff. And yet, it's fine if you get it, but if you don't, it doesn't always make sense. And I've discovered through understanding how the human brain works that it can make sense for everyone. So my intention is to introduce you to some basics there, and then to provide a springboard for discussion and for learning. And during this session and beyond this session, I'm wanting you really to reflect on what I've been saying and apply it to your projects. And you'll see that there's some themes which come up again and again through the different sessions in the festival this week. So I'm going to start with a big statement. When I wrote the book, and Joe's told you the title, with its subtitle, A Leader's Guide to Walking in Fog, I wondered 3 years ago if it was only me. But with the arrival of COVID on the scene and many conversations I've had with people who've read the book, I've decided I wasn't being bold enough. So I'm going to make a really bold statement. And my statement is this: half the time when we're trying to deliver projects, we feel as if we're walking in fog. And the big thing is, we dare not tell anyone. You'll see later on in the week, the theme of walking in fog comes up again and again. But first of all, I want to check out whether my assumptions mirror yours. So I'm going to invite you to take part in a poll. And the poll is this: half the time, I feel as if I'm walking in fog. Now, I want to know, number one, has Carol got it about right? Is she making a vast understatement because you're in fog far more than that? Or is it a huge overstatement and you're in fog far less than that? Now, I don't know how many people are on the call. I think there's quite a lot of you, but I'm going to pass it over to Joe and colleagues to facilitate the poll, if you would, please.
Okay, thank you, Carol. So you should have a link to the poll. Has everybody got that? Oh, they're starting to come in. So that's good. Anybody's having any troubles with it, if you put a message in the chat.
I'm getting curious.
So far, the early responders, half the time, I feel as if I'm walking in fog. About half the people on the call say that's about right. And then, in terms of then an understatement, I'm in fog far more than that. There's about 20%. So, fifth of people thinking that actually there's a lot more sort of wading through fog. And then there's a few saying it's a bit of an overstatement. I'm in fog far less than that. So,
okay, I think that's really interesting to me. So you're closing the poll there, are you, Joe?
So yes, just close the poll now, and we will just get a few moments for the last votes to be counted, and we'll get the final scores up on the screen. So it looks like, just 57% say that's about right. Walking in fog half the time is how they're feeling. And then 27% in terms of understatement, it's more foggy than that. And then 15, it's an overstatement, doing okay.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I've done this poll with about 5 different audiences in the last 3 months. And the results are coming in each time around about the 80% mark, or either an understatement or it's about right. So no different. And it tells me something about how things have changed, I think, since I published the book a couple of years ago. Okay, how about this next one then? And the question I now have is, and do you dare tell anyone? So I'm interested whether it's true to say I haven't really been brave enough to admit it. Number one, informal meetings. 2, in informal situations. It used to be, would you have told someone in the staff restaurant or over a beer? Or for some people, perhaps, not even admitted it to yourself before today. So again, I'm just interested.
I think that's a really fantastic question.
Yeah.
It sort of talks about a little bit about our comfort with our organizations, with our networks and also with ourselves in some ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it can be, and I know certainly coming back to that last one about admitting it to yourself, certainly in coaching, I've worked with people when the moment they admit it to themselves, it's accompanied, maybe it's happened to some people on this call, it's accompanied by either a nervous laugh, it's like, oh, I didn't dare. And we'll see, there's all kinds of stuff tied up with what we dare not admit to ourselves and how that impacts the way we then behave going on. So maybe that'll come up in this call.
So we'll just let the last couple of ones in. I have to say, from my own experience, the times when I've been most probably stressed and unhappy, whereas I've not been admitting to myself the thing that's really bothering me that I'm not dealing with, and not voicing out loud. And the minute it does get voiced out loud, even to myself, it suddenly feels a lot more liberating. And so that's a interesting one. So in terms of then results, so looking at what we've got, dare not tell anyone, I haven't really been brave enough to admit it in formal meetings, 32%. In informal situations, 54. And then to myself before today, 12.
Yeah. Okay. So you know what you've written in the box, in the poll there. As we go through today, do let yourselves reflect on that and think about some of the things you might be thinking about, how personally risky you think it is. And also, as we go through the week and this notion of walking in fog comes up again and again, think again about it. I have a personal view, which is if we bang it on the table and we talk about walking in fog, well, everyone knows what that's about and it's not nearly as scary. But then I had to do it for the first time too. So there we go. I'll leave that as a challenge for you. So let's just move on again. And this will be the last of the 3 polls for the time being. So now I'm really interested to know who is in the audience, because I've got to work out how exactly to pitch this. So how much do you know about the brain? Now, there might be some of you who are like I was 10 years ago, nothing at school. You gave up biology at the age of 12. You knew you've got one and not much more else. Some of you would have studied it at school or read a bit. And then there may be, I don't know how many, but we'll find out, have got a PhD in it, studied it at university, or maybe it informs everything you do. So there we go. And as we leave you to that, so Joe, how about you? How much do you know about the brain, and when did you start learning about it?
Very recently. It's an interesting one. I didn't do biology even to GCSE level, so the sort of whole mechanics of it was a mystery. And I started exploring it because I was getting frustrated with having the processes in place, the project management, the change management, all of that stuff, and you go, and it's still not working. What's the gap? What's the missing bit? And it was really that thing about understanding that it's about the brain and the mindset and the fears and things that are preventing somebody from engaging, that suddenly thought, aha, this is something I really need to learn more about. And so I started doing some research, reading up on it, and then, I think this is an area that needs to be understood much more broadly by program and project managers and change managers to understand how it does impact on what we do. So the results are coming in. So we have sort of a small number that have no knowledge particularly about it. I think that's about 12%, I can see underneath the background blob. A few studied at school, so we've got a quarter there. Nearly half have read a bit about it, and we've got about 15% who have studied in detail. So maybe we can get some thoughts and comments from them in the chat and share their knowledge as well. That's fantastic.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Thanks everyone for completing it. Okay, so I'm now going to put on a big disclaimer. You'll get used to seeing some of my pictures as well. Well, you've seen from the feedback of the results, some people probably know a whole lot more than I do. Yeah, and there are tens of thousands of people researching the whole area of neuroscience at the minute. And I'm not going to flag myself as the expert, but I was in a webinar with a chap called Professor Paul Brown, who's one of the people who brought applied neuroscience into the organizational world a couple of years ago. And as I was quizzing him about what he was doing and success rates and so on, he said to me something which I think is really profound. He said to me, what you've got to understand, Carol, is that neuroscience in organizations is a bit like Christmas trees. There are all of the baubles, and then there's the tree. And for this session, we've got an hour and a half. So we're getting the tree, all right? This is Carol's absolute basics. And when I say absolute basics, I think it's simplified well down. They are very well established for those in the know, but I'm not in the business of trying to get you au fait with the baubles. I'm not even sure, if I'm honest, and this might scandalize our 15%, that the baubles are necessary for the vast majority of us. But if they interest you, I'm not going to say, take no notice of them, all right? But let's go for the tree today. And I'm going to start by introducing you to a model of the brain. And it's called The Brain in the Palm of Your Hand. And it's not mine, it comes from Dan Siegel. Again, 15% have probably heard of Dan Siegel. Dan Siegel was one of the first people to come up with the definition of the human mind. He is based at UCLA, and if you've come across Daniel Goldman, who's very well known for his work on emotional intelligence, I'll tell you they're best mates. So they're kind of work in the same world. So I'm telling you, it's a very credible model, even if it's quite simple. And I'm going to ask you to follow along with me. So I want you waving your hands in the air, just like I am, because the brain may come as a surprise to you. It came as a surprise to me. It does not only live in your head, it's embodied. It links up through all your neural pathways, right down to the tips of your fingers and all your tips of your toes and all your bodily organs as well. And we remember things better if we have an embodied experience. So wave your hands along with me. And this model of the brain says the brain has got 3 parts. Just one hand, Joe, not 2. You can look at it as well. So look at your hand and then trace around the palm of your hand with your fingers of your other hand. In this model of the brain, the palm of your hand represents your brain stem. I'm going to simplify it greatly. Your brain stem is essentially responsible for all of your body processes. So just trace now down from the root of your wrist right down your forearm. You can see how, as I said, through all those neural pathways, it links to the whole of your body. Your brain stem is responsible for things like how fast your heart beats, how deep or shallowly you breathe, and lots and lots of your other bodily processes. So, and I might get some of these wrong, but you'll get my drift. When you wake up, when you go to sleep, when you're hungry, when you're thirsty, your temperature control, just all of it. Okay, now take the thumb of that hand and wrap it over. Trace from the root of the thumb to your thumbnail. This represents the limbic system, or your feeling brain. Essentially, it's your emotional command center, where aspects of memory reside and where many, if not most, of your impulses and behaviors originate. Now take the fingers and wrap them over the top. Trace from the back knuckles over the front knuckles to your fingernails. That's the 3rd part of your brain, your thinking brain, or your prefrontal cortex. When you're making very rational decisions, most of that work happens in your thinking brain. When you're doing masses of logical analysis, that would happen in your thinking brain too. Equally, it's the site of higher human functions like empathy and moral judgment. Can you see how the 3 parts are interconnected? Yeah? They operate as a single system. And if you want to know how it fits in your head, hold it up like this, bang on your forehead, and that's where it is, okay? Running straight down through your spinal cord into your body. Now, the brain's #1 function, and this really came, ridiculous, but it did. It came as a surprise to me when I started learning about it. Your brain's #1 function is to ensure your survival. And in order to do that, and again, I'm simplifying, there is a part of the brain which you may have heard of called the amygdala. Don't worry about the names, it doesn't matter. But in this model, I like to think of it sitting here on the root of your thumb. So it's kind of connected into your brain stem. It's very close to the limbic system and not far away from the prefrontal cortex either. Now, your amygdala is scanning all the time. It's really interested. Is it safe or is it hostile? It takes in information from your body. So trace up again through here. Have I got butterflies in my stomach? What's happened to my breathing? Has my heart rate gone up? And it's doing this assessment. Is it safe or is it hostile? But it also takes in information through your 5 senses. So what you're seeing, it's scanning. What am I looking at here? What can I hear? What's their tone of voice like? It's about smell, taste, and touch. All of those things. And this is really important, based on your prior experience. Is it safe or is it hostile? So my previous experience, I might go into a room, see somebody react by raising an eyebrow. It might remind me, based on my past experience, of, I don't know, the project sponsor who lost his rag with me one day. Joe, never having been in that meeting with the same project sponsor, will sit there and think, oh, that's all right. Yeah, so we have completely different memories which are triggered by it. If I saw this project sponsor and I thought, oh, don't like that, it would alert me and it would begin to divert energy away from my thinking brain. The first thing that actually happens is we get a physical sensation, an avoidance sensation, perhaps that knot in your stomach. Can you see how I'm raising my fingers just a little bit? It diverts energy away from my thinking brain. And following on very shortly from that, from the physical sensation, and this, by the way, is all happening below your level of awareness, we get an avoidance emotions are triggered. So avoidance emotions, typically things like anger, feeling quite fearful, what else might be sadness, disgust, or coming back to the big secret we dare not tell anyone, feeling ashamed. Yeah, shame is another big avoidance emotion. And so these avoidance emotions are triggered. Our thinking brain goes offline a little bit. So, and shortly after that, the action of taking our thinking brain offline is because it's priming us for an avoidance response, avoidance behaviors. So I might turn really quite defensive, for example, have that sense of wanting to withdraw. Have you ever been stuck and thought, I don't want to be in this meeting, or had a stakeholder you can't get hold of, for example? That would be another one. They're withdrawn from the thing. It's just too scary for them. Or perhaps you kind of get a bit aggressive. Now, you might not think you are being. I was speaking to someone not long ago who comes from one of the Mediterranean countries, and he's going, you know, I speak faster and louder. And how is that landing with other people? Yeah. So what do we have? We have avoidance emotions leading to avoidance behaviors. Now, all of us, I put it to you, are really familiar with the notion of the fight and flight response. And that's essentially what I'm describing here. But very few of us, I think about the fight and flight response in an organizational context. So if I was to say to you, there is a car speeding towards you, I bet you'll all nod your heads if I say, yeah, you know, don't you? Your thinking brain, book, it goes completely offline. We go onto autopilot and we do what we need to do in order to survive. Now, the curious thing is the human brain does not distinguish between physical threat and social threat. And organizations, I suggest to you, are full of social threat that we're not aware of. And these social threats dictate our behaviors. Now, just bring your fingers back online. The amygdala, though, doesn't always detect that everything is threatening. Sometimes, actually, it feels quite safe. And so instead of the avoidance responses, the avoidance emotions, what's triggered are the approach emotions. So things like feeling really excited or joyful about the work that you're doing, feeling highly motivated, and feeling well supported, taken care of. Perhaps you've got a project director or program director, or maybe you are the project leader who takes care of your staff and makes them feel really well looked after and well cared for. Approach emotions lead to approach behaviors. And so when our thinking brains are really are online really well, the kind of behaviors you'll see is we are able to collaborate really well. We can be really, really creative. We can learn really well, and we can inspire other people. So I put it to you, in the workplace, the assumption is our thinking brains are online all of the time. And I'm not actually sure that that's true. So I'm conscious I've spoken to you an awful lot. I'm going to now therefore give you a slide, that's this one here, which pulls all of that stuff together. So you can see it, can't you? The emotions when your thinking brains are online and the kind of behaviors that come with that, and when it's offline, the kind of emotions and behaviors that come with that. And now I'm going to move on and invite you to use the chat. And I'm really curious, and again, there might be a slight time delay as you get your thoughts together, but what's helpful about this model for you? What does it start to explain? And I can see you looking at the screen there, and I'm guessing people are having typing things. So Jo, I'm going to pick on you again.
That's great. It's a really interesting one, and I have to say that this was quite a profound insight for me and my own response to other people, because I think, like a lot of people, I was always thinking other people are the problem. and actually, when I started to understand that actually I was going into a situation with certain people or certain groups, preempting and premeditating what was actually going to happen, I was going in with a mindset and an emotional response that was probably not healthy at all. And understanding this helped me to actually reflect on how I was actually setting the scene for that response and how I could do something about it to change how that dynamic would work. So I think this is a very powerful kind of self-awareness understanding about me and my responses to others.
Lovely. And there's some stuff coming through into the chat there.
So let's have a look. So Robert says it explains why individuals act the way they do. Barry, the importance of creating the right environment and atmosphere for collaboration to occur is really important. Absolutely. We can observe when we are slipping to using the offline brain and pull thinking back. And again, that's a great comment from Claire, because that then links to that sense of mindfulness, doesn't it? So understanding when you're responding in an emotional way that's perhaps not helpful. Yeah. So Oliver's put down around rationalizes fear of failure to push through to success. And Emma's made a comment, it demonstrates really well how important it is to approach stakeholders in the right way, right from the beginning, to assure they remain online. Absolutely.
Yeah, and maybe can I just put something else in? So just imagine this, coming back to that, approaching stakeholders in the right way. And so I have to do it this way around, don't I? So here you are, and maybe you haven't prepared quite as well as you'd like to. So you're coming into a meeting and you're a bit wobbly like this. And the thing is, once our thinking brains are beginning to go offline a little bit, our vision and our ability to interpret what's going on around us also drops. And we can start seeing things wrong, and then the other person may start picking stuff up from us, and can you see what happens? And so this is why I talk about invisible dynamics. One of us can really unintentionally wind somebody else up, and we'll talk more about that later. But just I wish I could see you all dancing with your hands. So are we okay to move on? So that was the...
Yep, some really fantastic comments, and we'll share those afterwards. Some really great insights and thoughts from people and reflections.
Great. Okay, so I want to change gear just a little bit and to say to you, when we're under pressure, it also has an impact on how online our thinking brains are. And you may be familiar with this little curve. So this is the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which was done, it goes back 50 years plus, a long time back. And this notion that, we need a certain amount of stress. Stress per se is not a bad thing. We need a certain amount of stress and a stimulation, if you like, to be able to perform at all. But what happens is, if we get too much of it, our performance starts to drop off quite rapidly. And at the moment, we're hearing so much, aren't we? And I guess we're all experiencing it too, about the overwhelm. There's just too much going on. Stuff on the right-hand side of the curve. Now, I first used this chart before the days of COVID, but I think it's also really interesting that work for us can be really overstimulating, take us so where performance drops off a long way. But life in general, when we're so confined, there's so little stimulation because we're all under lockdown, that kind of we're under, it's stressful because of that. So that has an impact on our performance too. So that's just something, a little nuance to leave you with related to COVID. And then this next one is a survey which was done again before COVID. I'm interested in how it might relate to yourselves, and we won't do a poll on it. But this was, I was talking at the Project Management Summit in Dublin in 2019, and they did a survey amongst just 400 people, and they were asked, so 400 project leaders, and they were asking how many of you are under prolonged stress. So it's really lasting week in and week out. And 40% of respondents back then, again, before pandemic, were saying that was a real challenge for them. In IT, up to 44%, and then architecture, engineering, and construction around about 39%, and down to 5% for those people in operations. And we haven't got time to look at the detail, but I suppose I just want you to reflect on how much stress are you under, and what might that be doing to your ability to keep your thinking brain online and to be able to regulate well. So when I'm talking about regulating well, keeping your thinking brain really online. And then this one, I think some people find it really revolutionary. I was trying to explain what I was observing in organizations. This again is going back to before I wrote the book. And it seemed to me that we lose sight of the kind of systemic thing. So I want to talk you through this little project stress cycle. So we have someone, say it's a powerful project leader or a powerful stakeholder in the middle who's feeling really stressed out. The stress levels are increasing. And what we know, don't we, is as our stress levels increase, it increases the amount of defensive and fight and flight behaviors that there are. And of course, if our thinking, so if we've got someone there whose thinking brain is offline, what happens? Well, there's less trust around, isn't there? People will give that person a wide berth. So we can see how we can move up then to the green bubbles here. Inevitably, we'll have less effective relationships and communications, less effective collaboration, and less creativity. Now, I bet all of the projects that you're working on are dependent on all of those things being in place. And of course, when they're not happening as they're supposed to, word gets out. Not only does word get out though, if we're not being as creative and collaborative as we should be, the chances of success go down. And then word gets out, word gets out about, is this project going to succeed or not? And as word gets out, that increases the stress level. So we come back to this grey box. But also think of so many of your stakeholders, I'm guessing. They start to get more antsy. It's not going the way I want it. And what do they want to do? I need to seize more control. And I'm guessing many of you are then subjected to their more controlling behaviors. And how about this one? Increasing demands for information in goodness knows how many formats. And nobody really thinking, what is that doing to our project leaders in terms of now having to deliver so much more information in so many different formats? And so you can see how the stress levels will keep on rising. But I'm going to put something else on the table here, going from this little bluey green box down in the bottom right here. Many of the project leaders, and I can't talk about you, many of the project leaders I've met have been brought up in a world where a lot of their work has been very process-based. And so when they're subjected to more demands for information, what they start to do is provide it. And actually going out to meet people and to work out, well, how do we address these issues? It's not their first love for many of them. And they're not so inclined to do it. And so what happens is we can often find a battening down of the hatches of doing more of the very thing, which is not going to help get our project out of this little cycle. And what's so important is to understand that excess stress can create a systemic challenge. Can you see how this can lead to you not being able to get the kind of outcomes that you're after? And I think we often talk about stress as though it's only an individual issue, but I put it to you that actually it's not. It also can have a huge impact on your ability to deliver right across the system. So I want to give you a chance now to reflect on this. Where have you seen parts of the stress cycle playing out? And what does it start to explain? And perhaps, Joe, if we can give people a minute or two just to reflect on that. and then perhaps move into breakout rooms. And I'm guessing from the numbers, there'll be 4 or 5 people in each room. And maybe if we take about 10 or 15 minutes for you guys to talk about that and then come back and talk to us, that would be cool. Would that work?
Yep, absolutely. That sounds great. And there's been some really good comments in the chat in relation to this, and some really good insights. There was just as we're getting sort of ready for the next session, I'll just read out Claire's comment, because I think this was a really good one. I think prolonged stress is still regarded as a rite of passage in NHS management. E.g., it's about boasting how many emails you have, meetings you attend, and projects you are managing. Yes, and there's agreement to that one. I think that's very true. So in terms of then next steps, everybody has to think about your response. We will be moving into the chat room, into the breakout room. If you can open that in a separate tab, you can keep this open in the background, but if you open up the Teams link and go into that, you'll be allocated into a room. Have a think about this. You'll see the slide in there as well. And we want to see your thoughts and comments and suggestions in the platform chat. So as you're going through and having your discussions and you have an insight, put it up in the chat so we can start to see it as you're having that conversation. Okay, so is everybody ready to move over now? Is that good for you, Carol?
Yep, works for me.
Okay, fantastic. So if everybody could click on the link in the breakout rooms in the description underneath the platform slides, and head over to the Teams room for the chat.
Great. So let me just check in, Joe, because I can't see all the screens. People are just beginning to come in, and we've got about 50 breakout rooms which are coming back together.
Yeah. So they've all got together, had a chat, shared their sort of experiences and insights, and we'll start to get them, feeding them into the discussion chat now, so we can see what they kind of they took away as particular thoughts or comments or experiences. So the first one we got coming through was from Emma, and she talked about the stress cycles really played out in her organisation by project communications becoming very transactional, and collaboration is getting lost. Projects are run by email, copying in many people to ensure that they're showing they're accountable, and it's processes being followed through, but stakeholders becoming unengaged, and the success of the project is decreasing. And I think that's an experience. It's similar to what you kind of talked about. A lot of us have been through that process. And getting those stakeholders re-engaged is a real challenge at that point.
Yeah.
So that's a really good experience, insight from her. So Oliver said that room 7 was very insightful, how the NHS approaches things differently to more corporate environments. It'd be interesting to find out what those differences are. So Oliver, if you know, what do those differences look like? Put it in the chat. So Angela sort of said, I've seen a real lack of clear governance structures and roles and responsibilities, and that increases stress levels. Not knowing who's leading on what and delivering which parts of the project can be frustrating and lead to project delays and failure. I think that's true, because again, it's that thing about people feeling comfortable and autonomous and accountable. If you don't know who's responsible, if you don't know who's accountable, it can be very stressful. So I think that's a good comment.
Go on, carry on.
Are you happy for me just to read some of these out?
It's all right. I'll keep quiet as I reflect on what people say. Go on, keep going.
So Patty said, I recognise the cycle in my team, but while we're taking baby steps in the right direction, the cycle keeps pulling us back in. That's going to be an interesting one. Is how do you turn it into a new norm? How do you reinforce that behaviour so it becomes the standard? That's an interesting insight, Patty. Thank you. Robert, I often see stress cycle played out when project reviews are initiated by senior leadership, either because the project scope has changed, milestones are missed, finances have changed, usually resulting in greater oversight, more requests for data and information, and a challenging environment. Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing more likely to make them feel stressed than having that spotlight shone on the project and feeling that it's being criticised potentially. Lucy, she's put, I think we determined that within the NHS, individuals have a lot on their plates, and this can cause added stress and not their 100% going into something. Also, from the hierarchy of program managers of project managers, sometimes stress travels through the roles. And it's an interesting thing there in terms of actually who's, what's the role to play in terms of protecting people from the stress, and who plays what role of which part.
Can I wave my hands? Yeah. Stress is contagious. More powerful people, the more they might think, or maybe it's you, might think you're controlling it, but it leaks out anyway. And this kind of moves us on to where we'll be going next. Do you want to pick up on one or two more comments before we move on?
Yeah. No, there's a really interesting one from Lee here, which is perhaps there needs to be changes in attitudes, individuals and organisation, on what constitutes project failure and how we deal with it. Now, I'm really with you on that one, Lee, because for me, I think we cause an awful lot of stress and damage by determining something as a failure. If projects are complex, projects are messy, whatever we think we're going to do isn't always going to work out. So I think we need to change the language. And Carol, you probably have a much greater insight into that. So I'll let you.
I'm just going to say one thing related to that. Comes back to that starting point. We have many projects that you're working on, if not most of them, at certain points at least, we are walking in fog. And if only we talked about it like that, it would dictate what we did.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't pretend that you weren't in fog.
Yeah, and again, this is challenging. We had the session prior to this with Fiona Spencer, who's head of the IPA and does all the assurance for the major projects. And there was a question there about, well, how do we manage assurance for projects in this very uncertain time where it's all very foggy, and yet the process says you need to be really sure at this point, this point, and this point exactly what's going to happen, and we just can't. And therefore, it's I think that's a very stressful element, because you don't have the confidence in it because you don't have the answers and you can't see where things are going. So how we adapt to that in terms of how we review projects, I think, is another important piece. Yeah,
absolutely. And related to that, I'm thinking about people that I've been coaching on the projects they're working, and what do we do when the Treasury doesn't understand that kind of funding? That's a whole other set of conversation. Are you okay for me to move on?
There was just one last comment from Oliver in relation to that, really, which is spoke about approaching project management from a more fluid, agile style than traditional waterfall models, talking about better, having a better approach as it reduces the stress level. And I think that's a key point, that if we can't see very far, we can't plan very far. And we need to take those kind of baby steps in order to understand, is this a safe direction to go in? So I think that was great insight there.
Yeah. And I suppose another thing that I would add to that is this kind of stress and emotional roller coaster is part of the project journey.
Yeah.
And it's often not talked about. So I want to encourage everyone to recognize it as being legitimate data and really important to build in. Let me just move on then. So this is an illustration of one stressed person. And I think from the comments we're seeing, there's many stressed people out there now. And so what I'm saying to you is the complexity which you're alluding to in your comments with all these different cycles, you can see how it absolutely builds. And then I just want to draw your attention to the headline that I've got on this slide. So under pressure, I put it to you, I don't know if it's you personally, but many of the project managers and project leaders I've worked with have got to where they are today because they have a can-do attitude. The pressure is on, they double down and they just try even harder. And I put it to you that once we're stuck in a cycle like this, if you have a can-do attitude, it quite possibly will stop you interrupting the project stress cycle, and it will lead you to create more noise. And I'll speak about that more, but I just want to leave that as a bit of a challenge. If you have a can-do attitude, does it always help? Yeah, so I'm going to leave you to reflect on that. And I'm going to change gear because I've painted a depressing view. And I'm guessing quite a few of you sitting there thinking, well, what's the solution? So I'm taking you somewhere entirely different now. And this is another one of my crummy drawings now. That's a good enough drawing. Back to my misspent youth. And this is now building on the work of Ron Heifetz, who speaks about adaptive leadership, which I'm guessing, again, many of you may have come across before. And for those of you that don't know, or aren't as old as me, the Camden Plaza was a big converted cinema in Camden in London, where I used to hang out very occasionally in my early 20s on a Saturday night, because my friend Graham used to run the lighting system there. And Heifetz speaks about, if you want to be as adaptive as a leader, you have to be able to be on the balcony, that is to step back up into the lighting box, if you will, and see what's going on down on the dance floor. And you may be dancing, I don't know, a little jitterbug there, or old John Travolta doing his business, line dancing, waggling your hands and stuff. But it's about, how am I as a project leader dancing with other people? Am I treading on my partner's toes? That's the kind of question about when you're on the dance floor. On the balcony, well, if I look at all these couples dancing or the groups dancing, how are they performing? How are they working together? Let's see what that tells me. So being able to step back. And I think many of us in the project world kind of conceptually understand this thing about being on the balcony and being on the dance floor and needing to move between the two. or take a helicopter view, some people will talk about. But I think all too often they apply it to the process side, the tasks and the strategies, and forget that it's also how am I dancing in terms of my interactions, face to face or over video calls, those conversations that I'm having with single people or a group of people. What's that doing to their thinking brains and mine? So I put it to you, we have to be able to be on the balcony and on the dance floor. As you were saying, Joe, it's not all about out there, it's also about in here. What am I doing that's contributing to the situation? And so the solution is about finding a way to do all of that. And some people would say, oh, that's about becoming more mindful. And so if you've done a lot of work around leadership, or even if you haven't, and I'm guessing even if you haven't, mindfulness is in the ether these days. We hear a lot of speak about it. So I'm interested for another poll, if that's okay, about where you as an audience are. When it comes to mindfulness, where are you? Are you number one, embracing it wholeheartedly? Is it number two, dabbling occasionally? Not sure it works for you? Bemused, not interested, or it's passed you by utterly? I don't mind which, but I'm curious.
I think it's a really interesting question, because it's one that's clearly at the forefront of a lot of project management development. So the project leadership program that Fiona Spencer was talking about this morning, that is commissioned by government, as part of that program at Cranfield, it includes mindfulness for project managers and also resilience. And they do mindfulness meditation with people on the course. So I think that it's very much becoming sort of part of the sort of approach, but it's understanding to what extent it's understood, it's embraced, and how we can see whether or not we get the value from it, perhaps.
Yeah, and interesting, because of course I work on the PLP, the Project Leadership Program, and I think it's fantastic. It's part of the course. And Fiona mentioned that they've put in a rebid for it. And I'm saying we need to make the links to the brain, like I am in this, and I will be for the rest of this course as part of it. So maybe I shouldn't be on my soapbox in public, but there you go.
Well, you've got somebody on the inside, because I'm on the planning group for the redesign of it.
Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, so we're getting some answers coming through then.
Yeah, looking at the results. So embracing it wholeheartedly, I think we've got quite a positive number there. It's about a quarter of the people who kind of really sort of see the value and really engage with that. 60% sort of dabbling or do it occasionally. There's 10% sort of saying not sure it works for me, and 4% bemused, not interested, or not sort of come across it yet, or not been involved with it. So I think there's clearly a great deal of awareness, if there's a very small number that haven't really kind of engaged with it. So I think that's a really positive thing. Yeah. So that's a quite a positive insight, I think.
Well, I'm impressed and surprised, actually. I wasn't expecting to see such big numbers, so that's just interesting. And I'm curious, perhaps maybe a couple of moments, just I'm kind of curious about what people's definition of mindfulness is.
So get your thoughts in the chat.
I'm not off of the right one, but perhaps in the chat, just a couple of.
Yeah. So while you're thinking about that and putting something in, so Claire Hodgson has put in, I embrace mindfulness as a technique, as it's a useful tool for resilience, but it's not a cure for all the overload. And it's not a panacea for too much work or too much pressure. It is cheap and it's therefore popular. And I say this is someone who meditates every day. I mean, that's a very good point. It's doing it from anywhere.
Yeah. I think what's so interesting in that, and we didn't talk about it before, but the project stress cycle, one of the things I think is really powerful about it is that question that goes with it. If we're in a stress cycle, what do we have to do to interrupt it? And I think that's what that comment is also talking to. So I can do something personally, but actually it needs something more systemic too. And
I went to a regional team senior management meeting to present something, and at the start of that meeting, there was a sort of a 2-minute mindfulness silence where everybody got to kind of sit, be quiet, focus, just relax and calm. And when it went into the meeting, it was a very balanced kind of discussion. It was very thoughtful, and again, it was that thing about, you know, getting past that emotional state to the thinking state and being able to do that effective decision making. But what was interesting, as an outsider coming in, there was clearly some sort of anxiety about it, because somebody said, "Oh, what did you think of that? Did that seem weird?" Or was that? I'm like, "Well done, you. That's phenomenal. I think that's absolutely fabulous that you did that."
Yeah, there's something about, if that's what you want to do, and I think it's absolutely invaluable, especially in the current times, needing to frame it for everyone that's arriving and being clear that it will work for some and maybe not everyone, but that's not a reason not to do it. Coming back to any definitions coming through before I move on with my own ones.
So Emma's put, mindfulness to me is a tool I use to turn off my internal chatter and calm my chaos. It works for me, and I was the biggest skeptic beforehand. Absolutely with you on that one, Emma. Me too. Lucy's put, mindfulness, understanding yourself, your needs, and being patient, being kind to yourself. Self-compassion. It's being in the moment for me, says Christine, appreciating your surroundings in real time. Yes, again.
Can I interrupt?
Go.
Okay, so I sometimes speak about mindfulness as trying to help people recognize meditation can be part of it, but it's not all of it. And that you don't have to approach it through meditation and the big although that can be helpful. So I'm going to put up a definition which talks about it. So I always talk to people about developing their mindful awareness muscle. And this comes from Mark Williams at Oxford University. And he would say, it's about having a direct intuitive knowing of what you're doing whilst you're doing it, so that you know what's going on inside your mind and body and what's going on in the outside world as well. So can you see how that would be about having your thinking brain really online? And just as a challenge for everybody, can I invite you all to stand up for a minute? And this is if you've been to Cranfield, you'll recognize this exercise. I want you to get into your bodies, because we've spent too much time in your heads with my comments. So have a good shake. Woo, whatever you need to do to remind yourself you've got a body, because I think most of us at work, particularly when we're on screen all the time, forget we've got one. And then just stop for a moment and just notice how that feels. What are some of the physical sensations that go with it? And what's it done to your energy level? And then you might want to stay standing up. I'm going to sit down only so that you can see me. But I'm guessing that you'll be able to contrast the two. And I put it to you that most of us, when we're at work most of the time, don't even know we've got a body, let alone what's going on inside it. And that really brings me to the second part of this quote from Mark Williams, who observes most of the time our attention is not where we intend it to be. It's hijacked by our thoughts and emotions, our concerns, our worries for the future, and our regrets and memories of the past. And I just want to leave you for a moment just to think and reflect on all the stresses and challenges of your projects and your work on them, and wonder about what percentage of your time is your thinking brain actually fully online, or are you actually not nearly as present as you could be because of your attention being hijacked. And so we could talk about separately, and perhaps that will come up in the Q&A at the end, but I think the challenge for all of us is at least to develop a mindful awareness muscle, so that we can be far more focused about how we're using our energy. And as I said, it's not only what you're thinking, but actually what you're feeling and what's going on for you generally. So that's a lot of the work that I've been doing with people recently is around that. And if you ask, if you think I'm potty in suggesting it, yeah, I want to just tell you this. So I wrote my book, this little one. And at the time I felt I was going out on a limb by stacking all this stuff I'm telling you about up together. And I was delighted when someone got in touch with cognitive readiness in project teams, because whereas mine has got very few references in, some of these chapters have got 70 or 80 articles and journals cited, which support the case for exactly what I'm talking about. And the notion of cognitive readiness has been developed by the Department of Defense in the States. And what they've done is they've essentially covered the same ground as we're covering here. And they've said, you know, if we want our, because it's defense, our troops to be at their best on the battlefield, they need to be able to respond and be very agile, just like we're talking about on projects. And that's about our cognitive intelligence. So what's going on in our thinking brain, how we interpret and understand complex situations, the patterns we recognize, and the systems thinking that we can do. But it's also about the emotional intelligence, everything around our own self-awareness and how we manage our emotions, and social intelligence, how we use this information about others, how do we build relationships and influence organizations. And they've said mindfulness, just like me, and just like we're saying here, is a crucial part of that, how to keep our thinking brains online. And it's all dictated by an understanding of the basic neuroscience, how our brains work. So it's not just Carol being on flaky ground. It's now completely in parallel, I want to say very well documented, which was really lovely for me to see. So when Carl, one of the authors of this book, got in touch with me, I was so thrilled. But let's just come back again. What will you get from a strong mindful awareness muscle? If you've got a strong mindful awareness muscle, at any time you will know, or you will be able to access the answer to the question, how am I feeling right now? How online is my thinking brain? And if it's not online, because it won't be online all the time, the next question is, and what do I need to do? Is it get up and have a shake, just like we've done? Is it to go out for a walk or get a glass of water, or stroke the dog, or go and find a colleague who can help you think something through? What is it I need to do to get my thinking brain online? And then with your thinking brain more online, of course, you'll be able to take a view back to the dance floor. How am I contributing to the situation? What might be going on and what might help it? And what being more mindful does is it gives you choices about how to respond. And I'm going to be really blunt. And I didn't realize the extent of it, I think, when I wrote the book, but I've certainly come to believe it since, with all the conversations that it's provoked in other people, that if we're not being choiceful about how we're responding, what we're actually doing is fanning the flames of complexity and making our projects harder to deliver than they need be. And of course, it bounces around. This stuff, as I said, is really contagious. So I want to just give you a few moments to reflect on that. And then what I'm going to do is pull it all together into a summary slide, because I promised Joe I'd give you a summary slide, and then we'll throw it open for questions, if that's all right. Okay, so this is my summary. I'm back to the Christmas tree. If you remember one thing from this session, it's this picture. The Christmas tree, very simply, with its roots in understanding the brain in the palm of your hand, why we behave as we do, what you might gain from having a strong mindful awareness muscle, being aware that out there is this vortex of dynamics which will go on, and that will include things like the stress cycle, which will add to the complexity. And that what I'm really talking about is learning. So for each of you as individuals, I'm hoping that I've linked up some new ways for you to be thinking, feeling at a kind of emotional level, and even possibly, I've got you shaking your arms and your legs, may have a better understanding of the physical sensations. So really being able to link, oh, that knot in my stomach means that I'm feeling anxious. That means my thinking brain's not online. Now I can do something about it. So a whole new series of neural pathways. And if we think about becoming more mindful as developing a muscle, it becomes just like going to the gym. We can, repetitions consolidate it. So every time you reflect on this session in your projects or later on in the week or with colleagues, you will be consolidating those neural pathways. And the challenge that Joe is facing, and all of you with wanting to build a project profession in the NHS, is about consolidating or creating, identifying and consolidating the new organizational neural pathways. So I hope that's a helpful summary that makes sense and brings things together. We've covered a massive amount of ground in one quite simple picture. So, and over to you for questions, really.
Okay, so we have a couple that have come through. So let me get the first one asked, and we'll see if we get some other questions in as we deal with these particular ones. So the first question's got a couple of parts to it, and I think the last bit's quite interesting because what it does is it sets the emotional tone. So the second part sort of says, do you have any practical tips and suggestions for starting these conversations about understanding neuroscience and project success at the leadership level without it becoming a career limiting move on our part?
I wrapped up in it is an assumption that it will be a career limiting move. That's my first observation. The second thing that I think everyone knows that what we're doing generally isn't working as well as it could do. So I wouldn't worry about that. And one can go into it and be really curious and just be saying, am I the only one that's finding it really frustrating? And that can help other people talk about it. And then I think there's some of the basics that we've covered here today will help it. And I know I don't know if she's on the call, but quite a few of the people that I've worked with over the time will do something like actually taking a picture of the project stress cycle to a meeting and just going, could we be caught in this? There's no blame attached. It's an image of the system. And be really clear, you're not blaming anyone, and be able to keep your thinking brain online as you're doing it. The intention is not about winding people up. It's just to be curious. So I hope that sounds practical and doable.
It does, and I think to support that in terms of what we're looking to do in for the project community is, part of it's about the knowledge, skills, and experience of the people and how we support capability development for people in the profession to engage with this and understand it better. When we developed the framework, we included not just the APM model of competencies, but the Change Management Institute ones as well, because that's much more people focused. But I think it needs to go a stage further, which is actually really understanding the brain chemistry, the neuroscience, and the psychology that underpins it, and have that as a real focal point. People are starting to talk about it now, and Carol, you were clearly ahead of the game in terms of this, and people are only just starting to catch up now. But the fact that Fiona Spencer, as head of profession for government, the public sector, is putting on programs that include, mindfulness and resilience, these things are starting to become understood, that there is, there is evidence that backs it up from an organizational effectiveness point of view. And that's the kind of stuff that is really starting to spread. So I think we can do something as a community to support that awareness and understanding, and we can do something to support senior leads to understand the impact of it on project delivery.
Yeah. Can I add one other thing in that occurs to me? And that is to say, it can be really helpful to frame whatever, if you feel it's risky, to frame it and say, I am taking a big risk just now. And to know it may not go down well. And if it doesn't land this time, it may in 6 months' time. But there's something about not being too evangelical. Because if you come in and you're desperate that you want everyone to adopt it, this stuff will start happening. It's like, what's wrong with what I'm doing now? I'm feeling blamed for it. But we can hold that stuff out quite lightly. It's like the big secret that we spoke about walking in fog. You are walking in fog as you do it. So allow yourself to acknowledge that as you do it.
I think that's really good. A really good and helpful insight there, and thinking about how we respond to it. That's really important. Thank you. So next question we've got is, can we each consider our own, we can each consider our own mindful awareness, but how would you recommend we get the rest of the project team and management also on board to ensure overall project success rather than just individual success?
I think I come back to the stress cycle. People relate to that really quickly. And again, back to there being no blame. We know the systems we're in are horrendous. And pretending they're not doesn't help anyone. It makes us more stressed. And so there's something about being confident about it and knowing that it's a journey we're on.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not being overly, you can choose who you talk to, and you can talk about what really helps you and what would help you. And again, back to, I might be wrong, I might be being bold, but I'm guessing there's 200 or so people, if not more, on this call. I would be surprised if we got a handful who were doing the equivalent of throwing eggs and tomatoes at the screens. Because I think it just falls in, it seems to fall into place. I've not met anyone who can't identify with any of it. What I can say to you is, when I speak about a mindful awareness muscle, and most of us don't know we've got one, and I sometimes tell the story of having won this is going back a few years, in a silent auction, I won a private Pilates class. I didn't do Pilates. And I remember the teacher coming, and I was lying on the floor in my living room on a yoga mat, which I do. And I remember her saying to me, "Carol, I want you to lift your legs using your stomach muscles." And I'm kind of, run that one by me again. And she said it about 3 times. And in the end, I had to say, "I need you to step down and press on, tell me where am I don't know I've got these muscles." I don't think any of us know we've got a mindful awareness muscle until we start to connect it up. And so again, it's about not being impatient, but recognizing, we have to discover it, and people might need help in discovering it.
I think it's also, it is a really good analogy, actually, as the muscle, because we know that actually, going jogging once doesn't make you fit. It's about the repetition and building that strength over time. But also, if you stop doing it, you do lose it quite quickly. Although the memory will come back if you take it up again, and but it's a practice, isn't it?
And it comes back to good practice. So I'm looking at this slide in front of me. I don't know if you can still see it, of the Christmas tree, and that consolidating the neural pathways is one of the learnings. And actually, the neuroscience will tell you the best way to consolidate neural pathways is to practice in a very focused way and keep on failing. And somebody, as Dan Coyne, I think it is, said, it's like about almost being blindfolded. You've got to bang into the furniture to discover where it is. And so it's not something you throw out of the window. It didn't work for me once.
So there's a question about how does all of this differ from Daniel Goldman and emotional intelligence?
Okay, so Daniel Goldman's emotional intelligence is part of it. Yeah. So he talks about emotional self-awareness. He talks about being aware of other people, but he doesn't talk in that book. Later books he does. In that book, he doesn't talk about the neuroscience that goes on with it particularly. Yeah.
We have a question actually about sort of resources. So somebody said, "Thanks for a great session. I'd love to learn more about this. Are any particular resources, books, videos, podcasts, websites that you'd recommend and could share with colleagues?"
Yeah, I've got a slide with that on. I can put it up now, or I can leave it in the slide pack for you to pass out to people, Jo.
That'd be great. Yeah, we'll do that. We've got a couple more questions, so we'll make sure we get to those. But if you wanted to put the slide up, if you
that's cool.
for that one, then people can see that as we go.
Okay, so I've just here that, so my book, of course, the cognitive readiness book is there. You have to like academic texts. all right, if you want to go for that one. But it is very, very comprehensive. On my website, Visible Dynamics, I put together some resources, and there's some various podcasts. There. And then I also mentioned the fearless organization, because some of you may have come across the notion of psychological safety, which is based on how do we get this thing working well in groups, keeping everyone's thinking brains online, which is written by Amy Edmondson, and the book The Fearless Organization is really useful. And then there's a website related to that as well. Okay.
Yeah, funny enough, I've just finished reading that one. It is really good and really useful for us understanding not just ourselves, but how the sort of negotiating the landscape of the organisation and how we support the organisation to improve its psychological safety. So no, that's fantastic. Thank you. Those are really great resources. I think we've got a question for maybe a couple of last questions. So we've got one which is, I can see use of the mindfulness muscle working for me individually. Do you have any advice on how we can get this to support colleagues, how they may be exhibiting their own stress cycle?
Yeah, I think for me, actually talking people through the brain in the palm of the hand. If you look it up online with Dan Siegel, there's lots of videos of him talking people through, so you can have the short version or the long version. Because for me, it's such a graphic illustration. You kind of go, oh, that makes sense of why I'm feeling the way I am. And it has no judgment attached. We all feel this way.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. And was there another bit in the question I've now forgotten? Or has that answered it?
No, that pretty much covers it. But I have a slightly different one, a more of a challenging one here, which is, how important is mindfulness to a project manager in their daily lives? Could it just distract them in their daily duties?
I would put it exactly the other way around. When people get it, when people begin to develop it, so pay attention to developing their mindful awareness muscle, it has an impact on everything they do. And what it allows you to do is it gets you, the more you do it, the more online your thinking brain is. And that means the more laser sharp your focus, and your judgment about where should I be paying attention gets sharper and sharper. And you're then able to identify, what are the things here that are really going to help me achieve the aim of the project? What do I need to amplify? How can I go about doing that? And what is the stuff that's getting in the way? So it quietens everything and allows you to be far more focused on your projects and in life in general. So if you've got kids kicking off because they don't like lockdown school, it will help you with that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. Thank you. We have a bit of a follow-up from the comments in the chat earlier, which was around project failure and the perception and focus on the word about failure, and sort of saying allegedly 70% of projects are deemed to have failed. But, how do we, to alleviate stress and negative emotions, is there a discussion to be had on what constitutes both project success and failure? Do we need to change the language of it in order to improve how it is understood?
I think there's a conceptual question there. And then I think there's another one about the delivery of projects per se. So I'm going to focus on the second, if that's okay. And what I would say is really important is knowing that the human brain, because it's an organ which is there to detect stress, there to detect threat. We see threat and we miss out on noticing where things are going well. And so what's really important is to make the space for really recognizing and taking stock of, actually, this little bit has fallen into place today. Yeah. Now, the world is moving on at such a relentless pace that I put it to you, most of us don't do that most of the time. And it therefore feels as though we're never achieving anything. And so there's a real place, and I don't mean celebrate, big time celebrate success, but there's something about actually being very choiceful about noticing where it goes well, where things are working, and how much time are you speaking about where things aren't working, and is that, yeah, but you've got the same thing up on screen, is that feeding this stress cycle dynamic? Everything's not going particularly well. So there's choices to be made, and it's not to say there's nothing that we can improve on, but it's about how do we do this in a measured way rather than that kind of frenetic panic.
I think that's a really useful insight. As a team, one of the things that we do is we have a short catch up sort of twice a week. And it's what's happened over the last couple of days and what's coming up over the next couple of days, which keeps us up to date with what's going on. Everybody does it. Everybody puts up their kind of virtual post-it notes. But the first bit is about celebrating success, and it's about celebrating what's happened in the last couple of days. So I think by framing it like that, what we do is we focus on, well, this happened, and you can go, that's brilliant, fantastic, well done, and everybody feels good. You're acknowledging it every couple of days, the good stuff that's happening, the fantastic things that are going on.
Yeah, and it's all about, there's purpose in it. It's not being soft, it's we're bringing our thinking brains online because that's where we need them to be.
Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, we've run out of time, but there was one last question, which was, Carol, do you get really stressed yourself, and do you feel you can cope with it differently?
I used to, and now I cope with it very differently. So since, the last 5 years, it's been a journey. And I think now I know, I recognize it. And it's a tip for everyone. Key to bringing your thinking brain online, one of the key actions, there's lots and lots of evidence which says naming how you're feeling. So if I can go, I am feeling really stressed just now, that in itself helps not to. And it's about normalizing it and not being ashamed of it. It's not silent. I will say it. I don't pretend it's not there. It's not a big dirty secret. So I treat my stress and emotions just like any other bit of data. And I have to work at it as well. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And sorry we've run over slightly, but there's some really great questions there and comments and chat. That's been fabulous. Really what we needed, I think, to help us to help our health and well-being, and for us to help others then. So thank you so much for the session today. It's been fantastic. So for everybody, with us a short break, and there's an opportunity in the next session to meet up with your regional leads. So it's a really good chance to connect and network. And again, coming back to what we've been talking about here, being part of a community, having like-minded folks, people who understand your stress and your problems and the challenges you face, is really important, particularly at a time like this. So have a quick break, cup of tea, and get ready to meet your peers and meet your counterparts. Thank you, Carol, and we will definitely be in touch to do something again soon, because this has been fantastic.
Fantastic. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, you find me on my website, Visible Dynamics, yeah? Just put that in. Take care and enjoy the rest of the week. I'll be there sometimes. Bye.
Bye.